Well, I read through that handbook for the recently deceased. It says, live people ignore the strange and unusual. I myself am strange and unusual.
Coming to you on the Paranormal UK Radio Network.
It's a strange hobby. Curious. Wouldn't it be better if you put her someplace? I've caused you some trouble.
The first Thursday of every month at 8 p.m. GMT and EST and 5 p.m. PST.
Are you mad at me? How mad at me are you?
The female perspective on all things paranormal.
I'll buy a cup if you buy a box of my delicious Girl Scout cookies. Do we have a deal? Are they made from real Girl Scouts?
From the East Coast to the West Coast, across the pond and the world beyond.
Captain Howdy said no.
Captain who?
Captain Howdy.
Who's Captain Howdy?
You know, I make the questions and he does the answers.
Oh, Captain Howdy, I see.
Nice.
Oh.
Not a psychiatrist, she needs a priest. She's already seen every psychiatrist in the world, and they sent me to you. Now you're going to send me back to them? Help her, just help her.
What an excellent day for an exorcism.
It's time for Paradivas.
They're here.
It is Thursday, February 7th, and that means it is time for Paradivas. I'm Murray Samuels, and she's Marianne Donnelly, and we're back from our holiday break with a new show tonight. Marianne, how were your holidays?
They were so awesome because they were so relaxing. It was the first time I've actually had a holiday where I didn't have like 18 million places to be at once. So it was really super awesome. How about yours?
Mine were fantastic as well. Very laid back, pretty chill, mellow. I didn't have to do any cooking, so that's always a plus. And I got my prime rib and my breakfast.
I was wondering.
I thought I'd throw that out there for those who are wondering. My mother-in-law's awesome. She made both for us for on Christmas Day. So
that sounds like you had a great time.
Well, and we're glad to be back live. Joining us tonight, we have a wonderful guest. He is the founder and creator of Small Town Monsters. We'd like to welcome Seth Breedlove to the show. Thanks for joining us tonight, Seth.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
It's our pleasure and our honor. I'm a huge fan of your work. And if you let the listeners know what Small Town Monsters is.
Yeah, Small Town Monsters started life as like a film series about, I guess mostly it started out as like cryptozoology, cryptid cases centered around small towns around the United States and their local monsters. But it is kind of ballooned into a production company that specializes in productions that are focused on the paranormal. We do films starting with Minerva Monster, Beast of Whitehall, Boggy Creek Monster, The Mothman of Point Pleasant, Invasion on Chestnut Ridge, The Flatwoods Monster, The Bray Road Beast, and this year we're putting out Terror in the Skies and Momo the Missouri Monster. We also do a side project called On the Trail of, which are episodic miniseries, and we just wrapped up On the Trail of Bigfoot, and that'll be out in March. That's actually our next production.
Yep. So you're just getting started into this. You've never done anything like this before, ever.
No, I have no experience with this. We're really bumbling along. Actually, that's kind of true. That part, the bumbling along part's true.
Oh, doubtful.
Marianne and I can relate to the bumbling along a little bit, but I digress. We have you on tonight because you were kind enough to let us watch a preview of On the Trail of Bigfoot. And I thought it was fantastic.
Thank you.
Yes, very well done. Now, you like I said before, I'm a huge fan of your work. I think that you do wonderful with your B-roll and your illustrations, like we were just talking about off air. You're able to capture just wonderful shots. I think that could be like framed artwork. To me, it's more than just, it's not your average B-roll. I mean, I think you do like 5-star B-roll.
That's on the goal list. Like every movie, it says a 5-star B-roll. And we go out and that's what we try to capture.
You're more worried about the B-roll than the actual content.
Yeah. That is actually, we spend most of the time on the B-roll. That's not entirely true, but what just because I haven't spoken to, I've spoken to very few people so far who actually watched this series. But did you guys both watch it?
I watched most of it. Okay. I didn't watch all of it, but I did watch several of the episodes.
And you fell asleep and you were like, I can't finish this kind of thing.
No, actually it was my husband's like, hey, we need to get this video done for our show.
Yeah. Well,
I had to go do some work.
So you guys, you enjoyed it though, Marie. Like, can you give me some feedback? Like, what did you enjoy?
I liked the progression of before I give you my opinion. Let's give us like a synopsis of how this played out. So you traveled to something like 14 different states.
It was all over the place. I think I put a list on like the cheat sheet, but I can't remember exactly what the total list was. But I traveled. I mean, it really was like literally coast to coast, because I filmed in New York and I also filmed in Oregon, Washington. It started filming in Northern California, but it's like a 6-episode miniseries that walks you through the entire history of the Bigfoot phenomenon and then where the state of where the state of research into the subject is at today. And I interviewed historians, researchers, investigators around the country and went out in the field looking for Bigfoot with a few different groups, including Eric Altman, who you know, and so I was in Pennsylvania. I couldn't even run down the list off my memory, but yeah, it filmed around the country.
Yeah, so that's what I liked. I liked the progression. You know, you did the history of Bigfoot, starting way back from the earliest recorded reports in the 17th century and Native American lore, going up through today, and then, you know, each episode it was like we were almost in a different neck of the woods, so to speak, of the United States.
Yeah.
And then to see the different teams and their different dynamics, the different approaches and tactics that they use during their investigations and what they seek to accomplish was all very, very intriguing to me.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was really a series where, so I've been into the subject for like a decade now, maybe a little longer. And this was pretty much what I've always wanted to see in a Bigfoot documentary or a Bigfoot miniseries, I guess. This was like my, my dream documentary. I'm not saying like I think that it's like the greatest or anything, but that's what I set out to do, was kind of create something that was focused on the subject that I would want to watch myself. So the first 3 episodes walk you through that entire history, pretty much from like the very early days of the subject all the way up to present day. And then episodes 4 through 6 are much more focused on like theories as to what Bigfoot is or different research techniques and like what the state of the community is like today.
Right. Now, when you were filming this, was there a section of the country that you felt had it more right than another?
How so? Like research-wise, or?
Yeah, research-wise, in your own opinion.
I mean, like, I've always been very into what the North American Wood Ape Conservancy is doing. Just because I know people that are in the group and they seem very level-headed and sensible, and it's a very intelligent group of people. I also
who they are. Can you just briefly tell us who they are and where they're located?
Yeah, definitely. They're in they're based out of, a lot of the members are based out of Texas, but they have a research area in the Ouachita Mountains. Actually, it's more in the Ouachita Valley. in the Ouachita National Forest, which is a forest that kind of extends between the states of Arkansas and Oklahoma in the United States. It's in the very like southernmost part sort of the United States. And they're actually their goal is to their goal is to collect a Bigfoot body to prove to science that they exist, so they can form some sort of conservancy, and like basically preserve the species if they exist. And so they're actually doing that by going out with guns in an attempt to kill them, which probably, when I just say that, sounds absurd, but hopefully in the miniseries, when you watch it, you'll actually get a better idea of what their ultimate goal is. I don't really think of the group, regardless of whether you agree with the idea of like killing a Bigfoot or not. Once you like actually see them and hear them talk about it, it's much less yeehaw, let's go kill a Bigfoot, and much more like, okay, this is a scientific approach to a very what most people consider sort of a silly subject. So they've always been a group that I've responded to, just because I think that what they've witnessed and cataloged and documented in the Ouachita Mountains is so interesting and believable. And then the other group I think that I would probably say is right up there would be the Olympic Project, and they're based out of northern Washington, up near the Olympic National Forest, and they are a privately funded group that is involved with some of the like very big names in Bigfoot. So like, whereas I think of the North American Wood Ape Conservancy sort of sets itself outside of the community, and they have very little interaction with the community. The Olympic Project is very tied into some of the big Bigfoot names. So they're tied in with Dr. Meldrum and, like Cliff Barrickman and all those people. But they're very level-headed, and they're taking a scientific approach to the subject. They try to follow the scientific method and all that kind of stuff. And so those are the two big organizations that going into this I knew I wanted to feature in some way, and I think those are also the two that are probably most likely to come up with some very convincing evidence at some point, and I think both of them are have some things in the works that could potentially be game changing.
Well, I personally love the fact that you went back and you got all those historical documents and everything, and we're taking a look at that. I love the research portion of pretty much anything that's paranormal, and just that you went back and you got all those documents to look at, to put into this, to bring into it. And I'd never actually heard of Bigfoot being called Wild Man and things like that before, which I thought was really cool that you had those documents from way back in the 1800s calling it that.
See, I think that's very, like, what you just said is really important too. It's like those first 3 episodes of this especially are geared toward people like you who might not have a lot of familiarity with this subject and with those more like almost obscure aspects of it. Like within the community, the wild man terminology and ape reports from the 1930s and all that's all pretty well known within the community. And if you're like super into the subject, but like typical normal people, like a general audience has no idea about any of that. And so for me, like, that's what got me into this. So to me, it was very important to like set that stage for people and introduce them to that concept, because I think that's the most, if not the most, it's one of the most fascinating aspects of all of this, is that like the Bigfoot phenomena wasn't born in the 1950s when Jerry Crew found those tracks in Northern California. Right. It was around for much longer than that. And people were reporting seeing things that sound very similar to what we now, would term as a Bigfoot, even as far back as like the 17 and 1800s. And we have a documented record of that in the form of newspaper articles. So that's really cool that you didn't know about that stuff. That's exciting to me, because that like, if you're like me, that's the stuff that really made me think, okay, maybe there is something to this then, like, because there's a historical precedence for this.
Right. And I always love looking at the historical aspects of anything because that does show you what you knew, what you didn't know. It shows you where things are coming from, giving you ideas. It's the foundation of everything. So I'm glad you put that in there.
Yeah, that first episode could have been like 2 hours long because I think the first episode is only like 26 minutes and we go through all the Wild Man reports. We run through the Ape Canyon incident, the Ostman encounter, which are Ape Canyon and Ostman are two of the big historical events, but we left others out. I mean, there's a ton of, like if we ever want to revisit this the Bigfoot subject and on the trail of, we definitely can because there's a lot of really famous like early reports that we just didn't have the time to get to. Like if I had an unlimited budget, this would have been a 20 or 30 episode miniseries.
Speaking of your budget, I love that your budget was, it was so low and you came up with such quality work.
It's not on this one. It was like non-existent. I don't even know. What did I put on the cheat sheet that it was like 5,000 or something?
Yeah.
5,000.
Yeah.
If that would include our posters. I don't know if I put that in there. Like that also includes the budget that I allotted myself to pay our poster artist. So like the $5,000 was, we bundled a lot of the trips in with other trips I already had to take. So I had to go out to not Northern Washington, but out to Kennewick, Washington in September because I was asked to be a speaker at an event out there. So I was like, as soon as I found that out, I was like, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fly out there like 4 days early, rent a car, and drive up to the Olympics and interview the Olympic Project. And I'm going to go to Mount St. Helens and interview some people out there. So like I was bundling these things into trips I already had to take. And that's why I was able to keep the budget as low as I did. I also never rented any equipment or anything. I pretty much just used my A7S camera that I already owned. And like lenses and all that kind of stuff. All the stuff we had on hand is what was used in the making of this. So we kept the budget at probably it's well under half what we normally would have spent on like one of our films.
Yeah, just to have 6 episodes and spend, $5,000-$6,000, you're just amazing that you can do that and that you decided to couple that. That's what I do. I'm a biology teacher and I go to my biology teacher conference every year and it's always in a different place. And I do the same thing. I'll fly out there a day early or I'll stay a day longer than the conference and I'll go do some paranormal investigation somewhere in that area. So I love that other people do that too.
Yeah, because that is where we get into like the really costly side of what we do is that travel stuff. So if you can find ways to cut that out or cut that down, it's a big help for, we're so low budget as is, but on this one, it was very important to keep our budget almost non-existent because we don't know, something like this is up against numerous television episodic series about Bigfoot. It's up against major budget shows and network shows that are focused on this subject. So we're going up against things like that. And when it comes to our films, like our films compete with I don't think I'd be exaggerating if I said like our films can compete with the stuff that is being put on like Travel Channel, but the episodic content has a much larger hill to climb. So it's always a little intimidating when you're going into it.
Now, before you started filming this, what was your take on Bigfoot?
It's funny because when I first got into the subject, I was like almost immediately I was convinced it was real. And this would have been back in like 2007, 2008, because I talked to, it's actually the first episode opens with me talking to Mark Matsky while we're driving in this car. And I'm telling him about what kind of got me into the subject, which was that there was this woman, she was a dentist or a doctor that grew up in the town where I lived as a kid. And she, through a friend, I had been in contact with her, and she was telling me about how she had encounters with something on her property, like a Bigfoot and her kids had seen it. She'd seen it. They'd all seen these, basically like a Bigfoot family living on their property. And that was my introduction to the subject. And so like pretty much from the beginning, I was like, okay, well, I talked to this woman. She seems totally believable. These things have to be real. Like that was pretty much, you know, as there was not a lot of skepticism when I was coming into it. But then over time, you know, through interviewing witnesses that turned out to not be telling the truth, and not I'm not talking about people that are in our films, but just talking to people, and then being in so many different locations myself where these things are said to exist, and having never come across anything that I could point to as being believable evidence, I had dropped to the point where I was probably at like 30% that these things might even be real. And so coming into it, that's where I was. I was about 30%. I also should say, like, coming into it, I did not expect to make this miniseries and have it sway me one way or the other. I didn't really expect to make this and have an experience or go out and have an experience. My entire goal making this was like, I'm going to make a documentary about the subject, about the community, about the people that are into it, and about the history. And maybe we'll catch some cool audio or something, you know, some really convincing audio or something like that. And it's funny because I think at the end of it, and I hate to give anything away or whatever, but I think the personal impact it had on me is actually much larger than maybe the you know, the evidence that was captured.
What were some of the biggest challenges that you had filming this?
I mean, just probably my mental health, because we started my first day of filming was in the Muir Woods in California outside of San Francisco. And I shot, you know, that was like a very easygoing day. I went up with a buddy and we shot B-roll, and, you know, it was fun, blah, blah, blah. The next morning I had to film an interview with Lauren Coleman on a balcony that was like, and it was unseasonably cold in San Francisco. It was like 45 degrees. And we shot the interview out in the cold for like 2 hours. And that ended up being my experience, very indicative of like my experience on the entire project. It was like nothing was ever easy. And things were constantly going wrong. And I was alone. Like I didn't have a cinematographer. I didn't, you know, it was me shooting interviews and handling pretty much everything by myself. And then when I got into editing it, you know, I sit down and I've got 22 interviews. I've got hours and hours of B-roll from around the country. Everything had to be organized. And it was just it was a very slow moving editing process, and it shouldn't have been. I thought the editing process would go quickly. I was behind on my deadline, and, you know, like it was just this thing where every day I would sit down to edit an episode and get a rough cut together. And I can put a rough cut together. Like I've been editing the rough cut for Terror in the Skies this week, and I put together like a 30-minute rough cut, 30 minutes of the rough cut in the span of like 2 days. And that's pretty typical for us. Like you can do our rough cuts come together really quick. But that was not the case with On the Trail of Bigfoot. It was like a rough cut would take me a week or two just to get the rough cut, just get the story roughed out. And things were constantly being recut. And there's actually somewhere there's a finished cut of the first episode that doesn't include me at all other than as narrator. That part of this actually came into play much later. I was narrating from a first person perspective, but I was never supposed to appear on camera. And it just got to the point I had finished that version of that first episode, and I was watching it. I was like, you know, like it needed something else, another storytelling device. And I ended up hitting upon the idea of, okay, I'll shoot these like sort of bookend scenes with myself actually in the episode. And so a lot of those scenes of me in the series were actually just shot like a month and a half ago, or a month ago. In the case of like the Adams County episode, that was shot in very late December. So it was about 3-4 weeks ago.
So why did you originally not intend to have yourself in it?
It was always going to be narrated from a first-person perspective, but I didn't intend on putting myself on camera because I thought I could get away with not doing that, mostly because I hate the way I look on camera, and I really didn't want to have to edit and look at my ugly mug every day. And but it got to the point where I just realized it was going to be served if it was a very personal story. Like, that was the best way to tell this story, was to do it from a very personal place. And that meant, rather than simply narrating it, actually going to the location where, like, I had been kind of introduced to the subject, and showing Mark that spot and talking about why I find the subject so fascinating. And then the longer that went on, like, the more I started doing that, the more I started integrating myself into those episodes as the storyteller. I don't think it ever overpowers or intrudes into other people's story. I'm pretty much there to tell, the story of the subject, rather than, to blab about myself every episode. But I did want to make sure that I was able to sort of integrate that personal story into every episode. And it's funny because the most personal episode is episode 5. Mm-hmm. And that's the episode I'm not in. Like, I'm never on camera in that episode. But that is the one where, like, my entire sort of perspective on the subject changed. But I'm never actually on camera. And the reason was that was shot all the way back in June. And when I shot it, I had no idea I needed to be on camera. So there's actually no footage that exists of me in Area X, just because I didn't know I was going to need it.
Yeah, I didn't even realize it when I was watching it. But now that you mention it, you're not, like, we don't see you in that episode.
No, I never.
You're
never.
there.
Yeah, you hear me. Like, that's the thing is, from the beginning, I was always supposed to be a voice, like, I'm asking the questions. Like, you hear my voice asking the questions, and it's pretty obvious I'm the one behind the camera. But I think there's something probably kind of very, not perfect, but there's something very telling about that fact, like, that I'm the one holding the camera, because that has always been my place in this. I don't consider myself like the guy that should be in front of the camera. I'm the guy telling other people's stories. And in that episode's very focused on that group and on those people, but it's also where something very intense sort of happened to me that changed my entire perspective on it. I mean, if you watch that series, my personal sort of change, like that, where my mind is changed about things, where the big, like, character arc for me kind of wraps up, is actually episode 5, not episode 6. In episode 6, I'm just telling other people's stories and explaining, the state of the entire subject as it stands today. That's very much like episode 6 is very much a farewell episode. Episode 5 is where my entire story, my character arc, which is funny to talk about myself in the third person like that, but that is like that's where my story comes to, sort of a head.
What was one of the most memorable moments during the filming? And I'm gonna guess it was episode 5.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So that excluded what was one of the other most memorable moments during the filming of this?
I mean, my entire time in X is the most memorable, but if I leave X out of it, I had the best time I've had filming on any STM project while I was shooting in Adams County with Adam, Shannon, and Brandon. It was strange because I've spent time with Shannon LeGros, and we get along well, and it's and I've spent time with Adam, and then Brandon's done all the music for our movies, and, like, he's my little brother basically. But those three and I, like, the four of us, we'd never been together, like, all four of us, in one room together. And so, like, you never know going into it how that's going to play out. Brandon had to fly in from LA for it. Shannon had to fly in from Las Vegas, and Adam had driven up from Tennessee. And we ended up, like, 5 minutes into the drive from northern Ohio down to southern Ohio. It was like you were in a car with your siblings. Like, we and it's funny because like we still text each other every day in this group text, and like it was like finding your little, like, not to sound incredibly hokey, but like your tribe or whatever. That was what it was like. It was like, okay, these people get me, I get them, and let's just have a blast filming. So that entire Adams County trip for me was really good, and it was a weird bookend to the entire shoot, because that was the end of the shooting of On the Trail of Bigfoot, was the Adams County trip. And it had begun about a year before in Northern California, and it ended in Ohio, fittingly. And it was one of the most fun trips I've ever had doing an STM project. So it was probably that. I mean, like, I didn't have outside of Area X. I didn't have anything happen to me that was like, oh, there's a Bigfoot here. We had a mountain lion stalking us in the Olympics when we were there, and I got, like, something that's not in On the Trail of Bigfoot is that I got horribly, horribly sick while we were filming the Olympic Project episode. There's the like slow motion shots of Shane climbing that mountain. Well, Shane took us up I forget what the exact elevation was, but he took us up this very high elevation and back down in about an hour and a half. And I got like horrible elevation sickness because of it. And I spent 3 days in California, or in Washington, like clinging to life. Not literally, but it was bad. Like I couldn't breathe. It was just a very bad experience. But even that, like, now that it's in the rear view, that's like a very sort of funny part of the adventure to me. So there were no negatives to making this. I would do every single thing that I did making On the Trail of Bigfoot again. I would do there's things I would do more of. Like, I would have spent more time out in the woods in the Olympics if I could have, and things like that. But there's so many positive memories about making this, and that's what On the Trail of was supposed to be from the beginning, was like a return to our sort of like very scaled back run and gun guerrilla filmmaking style that we kind of started out with. I don't know if you can hear it, but there's like a clock outside the window of my office, and it goes off every 15 minutes and plays music, so it's great.
I haven't heard it yet.
I didn't notice it either.
Okay, good.
Is it playing something really cool?
So they just added Hello Dolly to the repertoire for some reason. Nice. And yeah, so every day Hello Dolly very awkwardly plays on this clock bell for like, it goes on for like 3 minutes. So I think that's what was just playing.
Okay.
Can I ask, what is the purpose of having a clock chime every 15 minutes?
Probably to drive someone insane who owns a production company, because I shoot interviews in here. Like Adam and Shannon's interviews On the Trail of Bigfoot were both shot in my office, and Don Keating's was as well. We shot our Kickstarter intro video here. So I really think it's just fate trying to kill me.
But you control the clock, right?
No, I have no control over it. It's like a city clock.
Oh, I thought it was a clock in your house.
No, I'm not at my house. I'm at like our production offices right now, and it's like right downtown, and there's this giant clock outside, and yeah.
That's why I was so perplexed. I'm like, why would someone have a clock in their house that chimes every 15?
Oh yeah, no, I'm not crazy. I mean, I am, but I'm not that crazy.
Oh my.
Well, now that makes a little bit more sense, but I still don't get why they would do that in the public either. Is there a reason?
It's a very like small town. When we first moved here, I said it was like moving to Mayberry. Mm-hmm. So I think it's more just like them trying to stick to their whole like Americana roots or something, but it's more irritating than anything.
That's funny. That's funny that it plays Hello Dolly too.
I probably should mention, like, one very memorable thing about filming was going to Mount St. Helens with Mark Matsky. And that entire day when we drove up to Mount St. Helens, we actually parked at the Ape Canyon parking lot. So like we were in the heart of this story that I've known about forever. I mean, that day was really hectic. We flew from Canton Akron Airport. We had 3 layovers, Las Vegas, Utah, Salt Lake City, Utah, and then finally got to Kennewick, Washington. We got to Kennewick, Washington, had to rent a car, and then we drove 4 hours to Mount St. Helens. Got out of the car at Mount St. Helens after a very insane drive up the mountain with following Mark Marcel, who was doing like 60 in an old Ford Aerostar van. And we were rushing because the sun was setting, and I had to get that drone footage. And if the sun had set too much further, I kept trying to get him to pull over, because I was like, I'm not going to be able to get the footage I need of the mountain. So we flew up this mountain, got to the parking lot, shot that footage, and then managed to get his interview just as the sun was setting behind Mount St. Helens. And, being up there after dark, which we were, was extremely memorable. But also just being there in general was, I'm an East Coast boy, so anytime I can get out to the West Coast, it's mind-blowing how expansive everything is out there. And that was my first time really in, the true Pacific Northwest.
And coming from a native, I will say that you definitely did it justice, and I really liked how you could tell that you were enamored, for lack of a better description, with the whole setting of the mountains, and you're like, well, it's kind of like the East Coast, but on a much bigger.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the line is it's such a juvenile line, and I was like, really. I actually, there's a cut of the second episode where I didn't even use it, but there's I think the line is something lame, it's very similar to places I've visited on the East Coast, but bigger, so much bigger. And it's it's a very silly line, but it is true. I've been to the Adirondacks, and that was the first thing I thought of when I was driving around the Pacific Northwest, especially the Cascades. It's okay, this is that's sort of your anchor. Okay, well, I've been to the Adirondacks, and this is like the Adirondacks. And then, you come around a bend, and you realize, that mountain in front of you just goes forever. There's wilderness that stretches far beyond what you would see even in some place like the Adirondacks. And so everything's so much bigger. The trees are taller, and, the hills are not hills. They're these massive mountains. And it is funny. When you're in that place, you get why the Pacific Northwest was the birthplace of Bigfoot, because it makes so much sense out there for something to be roaming around, undiscovered.
I think you mentioned that you were in the Pacific Northwest for 3 days. Mm. And so that must have been a grind.
Well, yeah, especially because I almost...
And I was going to bring up the elevation on top of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, that line is a little disingenuous. The amount of time where I was actually doing any sort of walking or moving about the Pacific Northwest was a day and a half. For a day and a half after the episode kicked in, I was barely alive. I because we did something really stupid. We were in the northernmost part of the state, up in Port Angeles, and we went and we shot our interview with the Olympic Project, and we hiked up the side of this mountain, and we came back down, and it was a crazy day. We went to bed that night, and then I woke up in the middle of the night just violently ill, and then by the next morning I hadn't slept. It was all the typical altitude sickness things, all the symptoms. And Mark Matsky had decided what we were going to do is get in the car and head to a lower elevation. Well, there's a place, the Yakima Valley is in Washington, and we're okay, that sounds like a place that's probably a lower elevation because it's called a valley, but it wasn't. It was actually a higher elevation than where we were. So we drove to the Yakima Valley and spent the night, and I got horrifically worse. I just kept getting worse. And so by the next morning, we basically rushed out of the Yakima Valley back to where we'd flown in Kennewick. And then I very quickly got better, almost immediately. Almost as soon as we got to Kennewick, I was fine. But I mean, even having said that, I still probably spent 36 hours or so where I was totally fine and where we were able to explore. And I mean, we drove from Kennewick all the way up to, all the way up to the Olympic, National Forest. So I saw a good portion of Oregon and Washington. It's just I didn't get to do as much as I would have wanted.
Yeah, that's a shame that you got sick.
So did people kind of try, giving you bottles of water constantly?
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the thing was like it was just Mark and I. So, like neither of us really knew anyone there. We had already shot the interviews we needed to shoot. So we were no longer with any of the people we actually did know. We're kind of like strangers in a strange land. And, like we didn't know where we were staying. Like we're just trying to get from one spot to the next and get to a lower elevation. So I would, come down off of whatever was trying to kill me. So it was, it's funny because I think now that I look back on it, I'm like, I probably should have been more stressed out than I was. I really just wanted to get feeling better so I could film again. But now that I'm aware of like what could have happened, I'm like, I'm kind of lucky. Like, like there's things that can happen to you, I guess, when you have really bad altitude sickness. I mean, you can essentially die from it. So I don't think I was to that point. But if we had kept haphazardly just driving to random locations because we thought they were lower elevations, I probably would have died because that's how inept we are.
Well, but I mean, you had the right line of thinking, though, that a valley would be a lower elevation.
Yeah, it just wasn't. It was actually much, much higher than Port Angeles. But, like, it was cool, though, because we're driving, and Mark and I have similar taste in music, and we ended up rediscovering our love of Radiohead's The Bends and Kid A and all that stuff. So that was cool.
It's pretty funny. So now, as far as Bigfoot goes in general, what is your opinion of Bigfoot? Do you think he's a flesh and blood creature? Do you think he's interdimensional? Do you think he comes from UFOs?
Like I've always fallen into the flesh and blood camp because I don't see enough evidence for a paranormal Bigfoot. I'm aware of the stories, and we cover, like I tried to remain objective, even though on the Trail of Bigfoot it's being told from my perspective. I tried to remain objective, so I let people like Stan Gordon tell their story, and they're, like we explored the other lines of thinking. I've always personally kind of assumed if they are real that it's got to be some sort of undiscovered creature. What I experienced in Oklahoma, and the way it's put in the miniseries is what I experienced there seemed like a natural phenomenon, like an animal that was in the woods that was making a noise. Nothing that happened to me there. I could really point to and be like, that was, very spooky. I just have never seen evidence that sort of persuaded me toward the paranormal Bigfoot line of thinking. Of the preponderance of reports of Bigfoot, like the majority of them are people seeing some sort of bipedal animal walking away into the woods. There's the actual number of reports of something, very paranormal or unusual happening is tiny. It's minuscule. Now, what I see happen a lot, and I'm not talking about Eric Altman or Stan Gordon when I say this, but I do see this happen a lot, is investigators latch on to a very small number of paranormal Bigfoot reports, and they'll echo those reports repeatedly as being evidence that is definitively what Bigfoot is. Like, well, there's all these reports, here that of, some sort of very unusual Bigfoot sighting, they have to be paranormal, but that's a very tiny, if you look at the, the grand scheme of things, that's a very tiny number of reports, especially like in the doc. I asked Don Keating, who investigated Bigfoot reports here in Ohio for like 3 decades. And, he said of all the reports he took, there was never one that came to him that was of something, that was a paranormal nature. And he took probably 100 reports, maybe more than that, over the years that he was investigating. But then you do have the areas like the Chestnut Ridge where it seems like it happens all the time. So that is very unusual. So, but personally, I've always kind of assumed it was not assumed, but I subscribe to the, flesh and blood, undiscovered ape. That's kind of where I'm at.
And I agree.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that's kind of my stance as well.
Well, so I have to admit that after I watched all 6 episodes, you really had me thinking. I really started to ponder the whole Bigfoot thing. Mm-hmm. And, I've been doing podcasts and radios for 6+ years now. I've interviewed plenty of these researchers, Stan Gord and Lyle Blackburn, and did BTE with Eric Altman. Mm-hmm. So I'm fairly familiar with Bigfoot and the Bigfoot theories and the Bigfoot researchers and the reports. And after watching your episode, I actually have changed my perspective. I know, right?
I don't know how to feel about this.
I don't either. I was really surprised after I was done watching it. I was like, he's changed my mind.
How so?
I think that Bigfoot, it is possible for a creature like that to exist, mm-hmm. but I don't believe in him anymore.
Oh.
Yeah. I think he did exist at one point. Mm-hmm. I think he did maybe even up until the Patterson Gilman film. Mm-hmm. But I think that was really kind of the end of it, the end mm-hmm. of the era. And I think after that, people latched onto it, mm-hmm. And kind of rode with it. I think that and I know that there, you've talked to people, and I know all these researchers have talked to people, and they seem so credible, and they may truly believe that they had an experience with a Bigfoot. They truly believe that, and they are coming across as sincere because they truly believe it. But is it really what they saw?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I totally understand what you're saying, because that's where I was at when I started making this. Like, that was pretty much where I was at. Is I don't, I believe that they believe something happened. I personally was to the point where I just did not think, if you step back and you look at this and you have all the typical skeptical questions too that mount up over time, like why don't we have a body? Why, all that kind of stuff. But I will say, having something throwing rocks at you and screaming in the woods in Oklahoma does weird things to your line of thinking about it. But I totally get where you're coming from too. I also am fascinated by how, I think that's a very interesting response to have to this, to the miniseries. I kind of love it, honestly. The fact that I might have made you a skeptic.
Well, I had to tell you because it surprised me. Mm-hmm. It really did. But, after watching all 6 episodes, I started to think, and I'm just like, since 1967, the Patterson Gimlin film, mm-hmm. that was, that's still kind of on the fence on how legitimate that film is. And since then, I mean, we're talking over 40 years. Why have we not had a corpse? Mm-hmm. Why have we not captured one by now? Actually shot one or tranked it and caught it alive?
And there's so many more people out looking for them now too. Is the other thing?
Exactly it.
Yeah.
So to me, it calculated to that they just aren't there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get it. I get exactly all the things that are going through your head about it. I probably had the exact same thoughts because like I said, when I started out making this, I was at 30% and I came away from it. I think I'm more at like 80. Some days I'm at like 85 just because of what happened to me in one location. But I totally understand too where you're coming from, because that's where I was at like a couple of months ago.
Well, and I see where you're coming from too, because having a personal experience can change everything.
Yeah, and it's funny too because I went into that, and when what happened to me, I was in a very skeptical place. I had actually sort of prepared myself for that trip into X by pretty much shooting down anything that happened before it happened. Like we recorded, we videoed that eye shine. And I think the version that you saw, you might not have been able to see the eye shine as clearly because I think I accidentally left a color grade over the night vision footage. But either way, like we recorded eye shine on a hill behind the camp. And what was really interesting is like after I'd shut off the camera, I shot more footage I didn't shoot more footage, but we saw the eye shine return. And then one of the guys shined a flashlight up there and the eye shine took off sideways across this hill while looking at us. I mean, it was really strange. It was like seeing these two eyes move across this hill while still staring in our direction and move like 50 yards in like the blink of an eye. It was really fast, whatever moved. But when that happened, I was actually the one that was there. Like, I think that was an owl or it was this. It was kind of everyone else who was like, no, dude, I'm pretty sure that was like an ape or that was a Bigfoot. I was the one that was still like, no, I don't think so. And then it was the next night that, that something threw a rock and then started whooping and laughing in a place where there are no people, and I don't know that I got across within the context of that episode. I don't know if I got across just how isolated Area X is.
Oh, you did.
I mean, you're 2.5 hours from any road, and you are in a place where anyone in the woods trying to hoax you would almost have to have a death wish because they're going to get shot. Because everyone in the NAWAC is armed to the teeth, and you're also hiding in the woods. If you're doing that, you're also hiding in woods that are overrun with rattlesnakes that have adapted to no longer have rattles. There's mountain lions, there's wild hogs, there's black bear roaming around. We actually smelled a black bear the one day. So you'd have to have a death wish if you were attempting to hoax, that particular group. So, and there's nothing in the woods that can throw rocks other than people, or some sort of, primate.
A bird could pick up a rock and drop it.
Oh yeah,
Depends on how big the rock is too.
Yeah, that's the other thing is like,
that's a very good point.
A bird can pick up a rock. This was very late at night, so you'd be left with pretty much like an owl, like picking up the rock. What we heard was so loud that when it smacked the roof of the what they call the hooch, but when it smacked that tin roof, it actually echoed across the valley. You heard it echo like a gunshot. And immediately after that, there was this loud sort of I compare it to like an Apache war whoop from a John Wayne movie because that's what it sounded like. That like very cliche, like old school, Hollywood whoop. And then it was followed by like Gibbon-like laughter. There's no gibbons in the Ouachita Mountains, as far as I know, unless it's like an undiscovered tribe. But not an undiscovered tribe, an undiscovered pack of gibbons, which is actually, that would almost be as cool as Bigfoot if there's just like gibbons hanging out in the Ouachita Mountains. But either way, like it was enough that it moved the needle pretty far from like no way to okay, maybe way.
What's unfortunate that it didn't get caught on camera.
Oh yeah,
and yeah. It's pretty clear though that you guys were sleeping, and there's two reasons why. The entire time we were in there, I had the worst migraine I've ever had. I had that night that happened, I was on basically 2.5 straight days of having this vicious migraine that I could not get rid of. It was about 90 degrees down in the valley where we were with no wind, so there was never a break from like the heat. And I was just falling asleep. It was about 3:00 in the morning, and I was just falling asleep when the rock hit. And the entire event took maybe like 20-30 seconds, between the rock hitting, the whoop, and then the laughter. And I still never thought to at least grab my phone and hit record or something, because like fast and so startling.
It happened, and you didn't expect it to happen. And I sat up in bed and looked over at Adam, and he sat up in bed, and we're sitting in this cabin. And the other thing is that I think you can see a couple times in that episode, our tent was the little green tent that was like outside of the camp.
I was wondering why that tent was there.
That's our tent. For some reason, we thought we'd be macho dudes and set up our tent outside of the camp. And once night comes there, you can't see anything. And our tent's sitting only like probably 20 yards away from camp, but it's still, there's nothing around it, and everyone else is pretty far away. Like the cabin was pretty far from where we were. So we were also probably just terrified we were about to die, from like an ape ripping our arms off and beating us to death with them or something like that. So, it is unfortunate. Like we didn't record any of it. And there are some sounds that have been recorded in Area X that are maybe somewhat similar to what we heard, but I haven't heard anything that they've given me so far that made me think, okay, I could use this as an example of what we heard, because none of it is the strange laughter that we heard.
That's interesting too.
Yeah.
That what they've caught wasn't what you experienced.
No, they've captured so much. Like they hear new things in there and sort of experience new things in there every year. And it's almost like sometimes they think like if they are apes, that they're testing boundaries or just playing around. Like there were a couple of years ago, trees kept falling over for no reason in there. And they think at one point they were thinking that they might have been like knocking these trees over for some reason, which they had never experienced that before. But it just kept like there was no wind, and the trees seemed to be completely, they would go check the tree. It wasn't a dead tree. It just had been twisted and knocked over. And this happened a lot. They recorded like 30 some tree falls over the course of this one summer. And then you factor in stuff like the rain of rocks is probably the most fascinating thing that's happened in there to me. Just because it was like there's so much audio. We only play like 20 or 30 seconds of it in the Area X episode, but the Rain of Rocks was this event that happened a few years ago in Area X where something was throwing rocks onto the roof of this cabin for like a couple hours, and they recorded it. And what's really interesting is they would actually leave the cabin and throw a rock like up into the woods, and something would throw the rock back. And this went on all for hours.
But why do they only have audio recording and not video recording of that event?
That's a good. Well, they might have video, but I think the video is just going to be of them like in the cabin. They would have to. You would have. What's that?
Well, I don't mean to interrupt, but if they're there to prove the existence of Bigfoot and they have, something that's showering debris on top of the cabin, you would think they would grab the cameras and the rifles, because that's what they have expressed is their main goal is to obtain a specimen, because that's the only thing that's going to actually prove that it exists is to, unfortunately,
kill one.
I was trying to think of a better way to say it, but
yeah.
I think you see where I'm going with my line of
Oh yeah. And I can't remember how that went down. I don't know if that would have been a group that might not have had one of the, because they don't just go in there and like willy-nilly shoot at anything. There has to be someone in the group who knows how to handle a gun, or not just handle a gun, but who knows how to handle like a sniper, who wants to set up in the woods and actually attempt to snipe one. I don't think every group has someone in the Overwatch tent, which is what they call it, where there's someone that's actually stationed up with a rifle overnight with the thermal camera on. So I don't know if that was the case. There's an entire episode of Brian's old show, The Bigfoot Show, that is about that one event. And I'm 100% sure that they covered that on that episode. Okay. So I just wanted to touch, like, just even giving that as an example in On the Trail of Bigfoot was pretty much just to say, okay, this is a place where weird stuff's been happening. But I agree with you. Like, I'm not trying to beg off on that. I just don't know the answer right now, and I'm pretty sure at some point they explained why that is. I will say it is frustrating to me that they are not more interested in trying to capture video or photographs. They just don't care anymore about that stuff. And it's frustrating for someone like me because I haven't seen anything myself. I don't know that they're real. And I think most of the people in this group have had some sort of sighting and they like 100% believe these things exist. So to them, they no longer care about grabbing a photo or even the audio, that their number one objective is to collect a specimen to prove they exist. And for someone like me, I would love to see more like, photographic or video evidence. Instead, we have the monograph, which is full of really, fascinating pieces of evidence, but nothing that you can tangibly look at and say, okay, that might be a Bigfoot, because they're not even attempting. I do know when they first started going into Area X, part of what they did in there was set up trail cameras all over the place. Oh. And they recorded nothing. In fact, they said that you would have activity, and if you had a trail camera on, it was like how they would actually manage to sleep at night would be to turn on a trail camera. So like they would go nights, night after night where something was throwing the rocks or smacking the side of the cabin or whatever. And they were like, all right, we got to sleep, go out and turn on the trail cameras. And that night, nothing would come. So and this continues to be, it's Derek Randall's in one of the episodes talks about how you're just theorizing. Like we don't know. First of all, I don't know if they exist, but like for people like Derek who claim to have seen them, like they're just theorizing about what might be happening. One of the theories is that maybe they know somehow that a trail camera's there. Maybe they can see the infrared light on them, and those infrared lights for an animal that can run around, in the darkened woods of the Ouachita Mountains after dark. They might be able to see something like an infrared light. I mean, I can see an infrared light, even though it's very faint. So if they have heightened, eyesight or whatever in the dark, maybe they can see that light, and that keeps them away from it. Or maybe they can hear the mechanics in one of those cameras. I have no idea. Or maybe they just don't exist. Since you're Debbie Downer now. I think you're moving me. I think I'm being moved to like back to 30% again.
I'm so sorry. No, but the way you just explained it though, with kind of like their prime directive being getting a specimen, and they're kind of over the video and the audio. Now I'm okay. Now it's making a little more sense as to why it didn't get captured. And then there was another. This is so hard. It's great that we got to see the preview, but I don't want to go into too many details because I don't want to ruin it for anybody. But there was another situation that they did there, and I was confused because it was a successful trap in a way, and I think you are following what I'm talking about. And I apologize to the listeners who can't. But
they're going to be able to see this in a month.
That's correct.
Actually, it's like 2 months, but yeah.
And you.
It's just at the end of March.
Yeah.
It's only like a month and a half.
They'll. Hopefully, this is enticing them enough. I mean, it's a great series, and I definitely recommend all of you to watch it. There's this one part though where I didn't understand. There could have been more follow up to that situation.
Mm-hmm.
And
are you talking about? Are you talking about? Is it in the X episode? Area X episode.
The X episode. Yeah. And it's they use string.
Oh, the string trap and the So yeah, we can talk directly about that because it's not a huge it's a small piece of the puzzle, but it's nothing major. And more than anything, I wanted to put that in there to explain to people that there's more going on there than just them trying to kill something. Like they're doing all sorts of stuff. So yeah, they had this string trap. They had these string traps kind of placed all over X, and some of it is just to figure out how tall these things might be and stuff like that, but and also to track their movement. But they also came up with these radio telemetry tags that self-affix themselves to anything that happens to walk into it, and it's a tiny radio transmitter. They had put it basically inside of like a burr and put it on one of these traps. And something had walked through it, picked it up, and then proceeded to carry it with them over the course of like 6 months. And they were able to track it all over the valley, track the movements all over the valley. What was your, I guess I want to know, like, what were you wondering about that?
Well, if they had a tracker and they knew where it was, why didn't they go get it?
They were trying. This is what's really strange, is like they were attempting to stay up with this thing, but it was moving incredibly fast, and also it wasn't like it wasn't to the minute, so they weren't able to tell. It wasn't like they were able to like see this thing exactly where. Yeah, it wasn't like minute to minute they were able to track it, but they were able to get a pretty good idea of where it was. The other thing you have to understand is like, that place is extremely rocky. Especially when you get into trying to go up the hills, like up the mountain, the sides of the mountain. They're down in the valley. This thing was going up the mountains, down the mountains, around the mountains. And as you know, like their movement is going to be incredibly slow compared to whatever they were trying to track. And that's part of why it's so fascinating, is whatever this was moving very quickly in a massive, like 70 plus mile radius. That included going up and down mountains, into the valley, around the valley. At one point, it was behind Alton Higgins' cabin. Alton's cabin was actually where we spent the first night when we got out to the Watchtows. It's not in Area X, but it's in the Watchtows. And he's that was also the first time I got an idea of how insanely rugged it is in there, because we were staying at Alton's cabin on the side of this mountain. It was a really beautiful cabin, there was a shower and hot water and all that stuff. It was really great. And I was like, okay, how far are we from X? And he's like, 12 miles. And I was like, great. And he's like, yeah, we'll have to leave at like 6 a.m. tomorrow morning to get into X. And I'm like, why do we have to leave so early? He's like, oh, it's like a 2.5 hour drive. This is like 12 miles away as the crow flies, but it was a 2.5 hour drive just to get to the cabin.
Yeah, you even mentioned that you can only get in there with certain vehicles. So yeah.
Yeah, they've actually blasted like the bottoms off of 4-wheel drive pickup trucks getting in there. So it's not even like ATVs and 4-wheel drive trucks are even having difficulty getting down in there. There's a member of the group that's in British Special Forces, and he told me the only road he's ever seen that compares to the ruggedness of the Area X road is in the Congo. So it's not a good, I would almost call it a washout. It's like it's more like at one time it was a road, and now it's basically where the water escapes during during the thaw, during heavy rain. It's almost like you're traveling through down a creek or something down the side of this mountain, but it's bad news. But yeah, it's a great question, but they did try to catch up to the tag, and even once the tag had stopped moving, it took them days to get to the tag because of where it was, and they had to take ATVs to get to the tag.
I didn't even think about the recovery of the tag. So it eventually fell off.
Yes,
whatever it was on. I'm guessing there was some hair attached to it.
I think there is hair attached to it, and I think that's one of the things that is one of the hair samples that they're trying to have tested. And it's funny because I just talked to Shane Corson of the Olympic Project in the last few days about this whole sort of hair testing, because the Olympic Project also has some really interesting hair samples that they found fairly recently that they're trying to have tested. And I know nothing about DNA testing, and if I start talking about it, I'm going to sound like a complete moron. But all I know is that, according to what he said, there's like a few different type of tests that they can run, and the cheaper, easier test is not the test that they need. They need the very elaborate, test that's going to cost them a lot of money to do this, and that's why so many of these groups that claim to have hair samples have yet to actually manage to have, results turned around. They have to have this very elaborate testing done on the hair.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I'm going to take a minute to remind everybody that you're listening to Paradivas on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, and our guest tonight is Seth Breedlove from Small Town Monsters, and we are talking about his upcoming docuseries on the trail of Bigfoot. What else can you tell us about your adventures out there?
The biggest thing for me coming out of this is that a lot of the groups that we were involved with, other than Area X and all that, a lot of the people that we were with, I came away with like a very different sort of take on Bigfoot researchers. I'd always considered people that are like avid, like weekend warriors. I'd always considered it a little on the silly side, because they're pretty much out there just, smacking trees with clubs and screaming in the woods. But, like spending time with Mike Feltner and Mike Miller, like those guys are really passionate about the subject, and like they're motivated very much by trying to have some sort of interaction with what, that they consider to be Bigfoot. And it's motivated mostly by them wanting to go back out and experience what they experienced years ago, when they were first getting into everything and had their encounter. So I think from a personal standpoint, it wasn't just that I maybe believe in the possibility of these things existing more than when I started making this, but I also had a kind of a greater respect for the people that are into it. The Area X experience and adventure it's very different from the rest of this series, and it was very different from my other experiences filming this series, just because where those guys are is so different from where anyone else is researching, other than maybe someone like the Olympic Project. Just because I've never felt as isolated and alone as I did inside Area X. You're just, you're so far from people and humanity, and you're in the middle of nowhere. If something happens to you, you very likely could die, just because to get to a hospital would take 2.5 hours at least. Just to get you out of X and up that road, it'll take you 2.5 hours. So it was just a very unique sort of experience in the whole of making this miniseries. One of the most interesting things too about making that episode was, we got into Area X, and within 3 hours, Daryl Collier was saying he was staring at a Bigfoot through his rifle scope. So there was that too. Like we were inducted into X almost immediately. Like we got there, they made us go through they made us sit and listen to them tell us like what happens if they shoot a Bigfoot while we're in there. Like we have this freezer. If we have to, we'll hack off a part of the body. The trucks go out in this order. There was a very intricate situation. They have all the plans in place for, if they kill a Bigfoot. And then within like 3 hours, Daryl was saying he was looking at one through his rifle scope. So that entire experience stands apart from the rest of the filming of that series. The rest of it was stuff I'm comfortable with, like stuff I can handle. Like the PNW trip was intense, but it was just because I got sick. Otherwise I would have been fine. But that particular trip, the trip into X, was unlike anything else that was, a part of that entire journey.
If he had a Bigfoot in his crosshairs 3 hours after you got there, why didn't he pull the trigger?
The undergrowth in there is so thick he was staring at it from what he said, and I don't know how this translates. It was like 70 meters. He might even say during his interview, but it was like 70 meters that he was staring at this thing, and it was behind a tree. And between him and this creature is a ton of undergrowth and, tree branches and all that kind of stuff. And later in the episode, he talks about how there was an attempted, there was they call it the Echo incident. They had actually fired at one of these things, and the bullet had hit a tree branch and ricocheted. And so like when you're in a place with the undergrowth that is that thick, you have to know what you're shooting at. 100%. You have to know it's right there, it's gettable, and you have to be able to take the shot. One of the things they talked to us about was the fact that Daryl was out there alone. If he had taken the shot and wounded this thing, and it had either gotten angry and come at him, or he had wounded it and had run off into the woods, that's like the last thing they want. So they want to make sure they have like a very clear sort of shot when they take it.
That makes sense. And I totally forgot about the Echo incident.
Yeah, I mean, like that part is supposed to help clarify why they are the way they are about things. But I had the same question. Honestly, Marie, when that was happening, I was in the camp going, shoot it. Like, just shoot, fire, like, right. Because more than anything, I wanted to know that they were there. So like, and also the reason we left camp and started toward Daryl was because of me, because I was like livid that we were just standing there waiting, and I wanted to see something for myself. So there's that section, like after Daryl starts radioing in, we left base camp and started toward Daryl. That was because I was being a pest about it. Like, I was like, we gotta go, because I can't just I can't just hang out here.
And they tried to discourage you, and you were like, no, like.
Yeah, mostly because Brian was afraid we would start toward Daryl and whatever was on the hill, because whatever was on the hill would have actually been between us and Daryl. So we would have been kind of coming behind whatever Daryl was looking at. So he was afraid we were going to scare it off and he wouldn't get the shot or whatever. So we walked toward them. But what's really interesting is there's any number of things that were happening while we were in there that is not mentioned in that episode. We heard what very clearly sounded like an Ohio howl at one point, which is like this very weird, it sounds like it starts out sounding like a human and then becomes almost like a wolf, and then it becomes like something else entirely. It's a very weird sound. We heard one of those. We heard the clearest wood knock I've ever heard. One day when we were leaving camp to walk up the road, Brian, Adam, and myself were going to leave camp and walk up this road to get some B-roll. And as we were leaving camp, we had just stepped foot on the road and gone around a bend. And as soon as we did, you very clearly heard this just wood on wood, like something smacked a tree with a log or something. And so we heard that, and then there was that same trip where we walked up the road. We were a couple hundred yards up the road, and we started hearing voices between us and base camp. And as soon as we heard it, someone at base camp radioed in, and they were like, "Are you guys talking on the road?" And we said, "No, we weren't talking." And they said, "Okay. Can you talk so we can see if we can hear you?" Because they thought, maybe we had talked, we just forgot. So we started talking very loudly, and we get a radio call back, and they were like, "Can you guys start talking?" We were like, we're talking right now. And so they couldn't, whatever we were hearing between us and base camp was, it sounded like very weird sort of faux speech on the road between us. But anyway, when we were walking out toward Daryl, we were hearing sounds, kind of up on the ridges, almost like something was watching us as we were making our way toward Daryl.
Well, and you also had to be mindful of potentially getting shot.
Yeah, I mean, that I don't think is as big of a worry.
Because they seemed like they were not careless people by any means.
No, and we had notified Daryl, like, we're heading in your direction. I would have been less concerned about that than I would have been about like a black bear mauling me, because there were definitely black bear that were chilling in that area.
When you had also mentioned rattlesnakes that have evolved and don't have rattles.
Yeah, the rattlesnakes have adapted in there, and they no longer have rattles. They still shake their butts, or whatever you call it, the end of the rattle, the end of the snake. Yeah. they still shake that around, which is it's real weird. Yeah, they still think they've got them, but they don't have them, and it's really weird. But it's also terrifying because it's a very poisonous snake, and you no longer have any idea if they're even there.
Oh, that is freaky. Yeah, I didn't know that they had evolved like that.
Yeah, I didn't either till we were in there. Daryl actually told me as soon as we were in there, that was one of the big things, because I didn't have snake boots. Adam did, but I didn't. And he said, the biggest thing you need to be aware of is, like there's snakes everywhere in here. And it's funny because I never saw one. We saw 2 black widow spiders within like an hour and a half of getting in there. In fact, one tried to jump into my tent at night. But I did not see any snakes. But yeah, Daryl was telling us that one day he was out checking one of the they have these audio recorders that are kind of on these sensor outlays that relay things out in the woods, and he was checking one of those, and he was checking it. He turned around, and this snake was poised, like ready to bite him, and it's it was shaking. It was shaking its butt like it's like it had a rattle, right. And he unloaded it on it with his pistol, which is what I would have done as well. So
absolutely, I mean, you have no choice.
Yeah, I mean, like that is like a weird. It is a weird thing about this project, is it didn't start out as it wasn't supposed to be this personal, and I think it really is. Like at the end of the day, it's probably the most personal thing I've ever done. Hopefully audiences respond to that. Like I wanted to approach the subject in a way that was welcoming to newbies and people that are very into the subject. It was equally welcoming to skeptics, and like hardcore believers, and like it's definitely not with our movies, but with this either. Like I don't set out to try to change anyone's mind. It's really like, here's what happened, make up your own mind. And like for me personally, I came away from it thinking maybe there is a Bigfoot. Apparently Marie came away from it thinking there's no Bigfoot at all. So hopefully, and I mean, I actually think that's really cool. I don't know why that is, but I think that's really cool that was her personal response to this. And I'm curious, like once this comes out and people start seeing it, I'm really going to be curious to see what the response from like a general audience is to it.
Yeah, me too. Because for me, at least, the way, like I said earlier at the very beginning of the show, is the way it's laid out, chronologically, and then you go through the different groups of investigators or researchers and their methods and their goals and their experiences and then reports and all this, right? And then at the very end, it's a very complete package, I feel. And that's kind of what made me start to ponder the whole existence of Bigfoot. And with that being said, I don't think we've gotten Marianne's opinion on where she sits in the Bigfoot game.
Where do I sit? I believe that Bigfoot is a flesh and blood item, and I'm not super concerned that we have not found any, body or corpse. I know that weeks after an organism dies, there's not much left of them, especially out in the wild. Mm-hmm. So I'm not concerned about that because we're not out there in that area constantly. Yeah, there's a lot of people out there looking for Bigfoot, but if one happens to die, are we necessarily going to be there within a week or two to find its corpse? I have to be realistic about that. In addition to that, there's so many organisms that we have never been able to identify. And then in the last few years, we've been finding more and more and more. Like there were over 200 new species of organisms identified just last year, that we never knew existed before. There's a lot of places that we find these species that have been there for all kinds of years. We just haven't seen them yet. So I'm not concerned, but I do believe that there is a possibility of a large organism out there that we haven't managed to come across. It might be super intelligent, ways to get around finding a way to be captured by us. And I loved how you, Seth, were mentioning how maybe they were able to identify that the trail cam was there, whether they had heightened senses and things like that. All that, I think, plays into it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like people that see one have it obviously much easier than the rest of us. I mean, they're left with they don't have it's interesting because I talked to someone like Brian or Daryl or Bob or Kathy who've seen them, and they don't have those questions that we have because they've seen it. So like that's all irrelevant to them. Right. They don't wonder like, why don't we have a body? I mean, maybe they do, but it's not. It's going to play a very small part in their thinking about this subject because to them they already know they're real. So the behavioral stuff goes out the window. They no longer care. It's more about like, okay, well, how can we prove that they're here so everyone else knows? Because all this stuff that we've talked about, like the trail cameras, why aren't they videoing them, and why can't we get a body and all that? That only matters to the people like us who haven't seen them. If you talk to someone who's seen them, that they might have those same questions, but it's a very it's just viewed in a completely different way from us, from normies like us.
Right.
Yeah, the average people who have yet to see a Bigfoot.
Well, that again kind of goes back, explains the lack of filming done at Area X, because the majority of them have seen a Bigfoot at Area X, correct?
Yeah, there's very few people that I've spoken to that go in there who haven't had a sighting. And so, I mean, when you're talking to someone like Bob and Kathy Strain, or even Brian and Daryl, I mean, Bob and Kathy know their way around the woods, and they're highly intelligent people. Kathy works directly with the she's tribal relations manager for the National Forest Service. Like these people, like the people that are involved in this are not your typical sort of Bigfooters, and when they tell you about their experiences, it's not done in a way that a typical Bigfooter will tell you their scary story. They're relaying something to you, like the NAWAC people that I've spoken to, like Kathy or whatever. They're relaying to you a story that is much more centered around like this flesh and blood creature I saw behave this way, rather than like oh man, I was gonna crap my pants, because like you hear that stuff all the time from like Bigfooters. Like it's a scary story. Like here's the scary story, and it's funny coming from me, considering I make a living off of like retelling these scary stories. But when you're actually talking to people like Derek Randalls or Shane Corson or Brian Brown or Daryl Collier, it's not about that. It's not about like here's my scary story. It's like about this memorable event in their life that they're never going to forget, that completely changed the way they look at the natural world.
Very interesting. Very compelling stuff. Being a movie maker or a documentarian, I guess would be the accurate term.
Yeah, sure, both. Yeah.
Documentarian. Do you have any advice for people that are looking to make their own documentaries or their own little like mini series about things?
Yeah, you just got to do it. Like the
sounds easy enough. Just go do it.
Well, I mean, it really does come down to that, and I've tried to put that into words before for people. I get asked that all the time by other people. Want to know how we do what we do, and like the truth is, like 90% of this is luck. Like the fact that we are where we are, that I'm able to do this for a living, like 90% of that is luck. There aren't a lot of guys that can make movies about Bigfoot for a living. But that's what I do. And how we got here, a bunch of that is luck. But, you know, to get to the point where, you know, we are, you just have to start somewhere. And the best place to start is like, you have an idea for a story, you go tell that story. Like, don't let all the bullcrap that typically, you know, sideline you. Because we all have great ideas. We all have projects we want to start, and then we start them, and then they sit there and we never finish them. Like, the biggest thing is just come up with an idea, go tell that story and make it happen, and then tell another story, and then tell another story. And over time, you'll hopefully you're not. The other part of this is there's got to be an aspect of you that is never going to be satisfied. Like, it's going to be awesome if you can go out and make one movie in your life. You're already ahead of the pack. But if you can make that movie and you sit down and you watch it and you say, oh, this is crap, and here's why, and you can tell all the things you need to work on, and you take that learning into the next project, and then you take that learning into the next project, you know, over time the quality of everything will improve as well. So the budget doesn't matter, distribution doesn't matter, none of that matters. The biggest thing is just getting it done. And however, you know, whatever means possible, you make your movie, or, you know, write your book or whatever it is, because that advice kind of extends across all creative endeavors, that at the end of the day, it really comes down to you just have to do it. You're either going to do it or you're not going to do it. You're either going to come up with excuses to not do it and never do it, or you're going to make it happen.
Very well said.
Not really, but
I really digged it.
Okay.
Words is hard.
Words is so hard.
I really did dig that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know if it's still proper. I don't think that was still proper.
It worked, but like that really, like, you know, like we made Minerva Monster, which was our first movie on camcorders we owned, and there was a huge fist fight in the lobby of one of our screenings between me and a producer, and like there's never going to be any shortage of, you know, obstacles and challenges in the course of making movies. And you'll either let it sideline you or you'll make it happen. And, you know, if we had stopped after Minerva Monster just because we had made a somewhat popular local movie, then we never would have made Beast of Whitehall, which became, you know, a slightly more successful movie that had a national audience. And then we would have stopped when Boggy Creek Monster kind of couldn't quite find an audience right out of the gate, and things like that. You know, like,
wait, you had trouble with Boggy Creek Monster?
Yeah, Boggy Creek Monster is weird because it's actually one of our probably one of our least popular movies. Like, if you look at our like viewing numbers across all our different platforms, it's probably one of the least viewed, and we have different ideas about why that might be. One of them is that a lot of people seem confused that it's an entirely new movie. A lot of people remember The Legend of Boggy Creek being called Boggy Creek Monster or The Boggy Creek Monster. So, like, a lot of people seem to think it was just that movie, like it was the original Legend of Boggy Creek rather than a new movie. So, you know, that could be part of it. But yeah, it had a harder time finding an audience than something like The Mothman of Point Pleasant or The Bray Road Beast, which have been our two sort of biggest movies. But even Beast of Whitehall was wildly successful compared to Boggy Creek Monster or Minerva.
I mean, it has to be the title, because that was one of my favorites, The Boggy Creek Monster.
It's one of my least, which I've said, because, like, I have there's things about the pacing of that movie that drive me crazy when I watch it now, where I just wish I could go back and I did actually recut it somewhat for the iTunes release when it was picked up by Terror Films for distribution. I actually went back and recut it a little bit, and I hopefully fixed some of my pacing issues with it. But I just have pacing issues with it, and then there's little things about it that drive me crazy. But I do know that Bigfooters or people I've talked to that really love that subject, they really adore that movie, which is awesome.
Yes, it's one of my favorites.
Cool. I love the way it ends. It's probably one of my favorite endings to an STM film with Lyle walking around the cabin and then the camera panning up. I really like the way it ends.
Yeah. Well, and Lyle, being involved and he's the narrator throughout the whole thing.
Yep. Yeah.
Kind of doing all the interviews and being the front man that you were in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I kept actually looking back to Boggy Creek Monster in a lot of ways for things not to do or things I didn't want to do with On the Trail of. So I think it worked in Boggy Creek Monster, and Lyle's great in that, obviously, because he's doing both of the movies we're putting out this year, and he'll be in front of the camera again in our Momo movie. But I like Boggy Creek Monster. It was just the post-production on it was very rushed. And some of that had to do with the fact that I had just found out my wife was pregnant and we had a baby coming and we had all kinds of things happening at that time. So it was a very rushed post-production. I think if I could go back, I would have given myself like an extra 3 months to really fine tune that movie.
Child, all of a sudden that could change your schedule a little bit, just a little bit.
And I had a question for him, and I sat there listening to this last segment there, and I got distracted by the baby, and and I lost it.
Yeah, but, Tommy's around now too, and he has such a bizarre upbringing because my wife is a producer on our films now. So she's actively involved in the making of STM films. So Tommy's growing up around mommy and daddy that make monster movies, I guess. So he has a very strange life ahead of him.
He's got super cool parents.
That's right.
That's awesome. So what do you have coming up? Obviously, we've got the release of On the Trail of Bigfoot. When can people get to actually watch it? And where can they find it?
It actually, the official release date is March 29th. It'll release on, let me run through this real quick. It'll be on DVD, video, Vimeo on demand, and VidiSpace. It'll be released as the way it was intended, which is a 6-episode miniseries told episodically. People can watch episode by episode. You can binge watch it or watch it whenever you feel like. On Amazon, it's being cut into 2 films. Episodes 1 through 3 are being cut into a film called On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Legend, and then episodes 4 through 6 are condensed into a second movie called On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Search. It's the exact same content. It's just we removed the opening title sequence and cut the episodes so they flow together a little better. The main reason we did that is independent episodic content has a very hard road ahead on a platform like Amazon. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's the competition stiff or what it is, but so we cut it into 2 movies. It's the exact same content. It's just cut differently. You're basically seeing the exact same thing without the opening title sequence on each episode. So you can watch it on those 4 platforms starting out: DVD, Vimeo on demand, Amazon, or VidiSpace. After that, we'll see how it does. Right now, the first On the Trail of miniseries, which is On the Trail of Champ, is actually free on Amazon Prime or YouTube. So you can go watch the first On the Trail of, which was On the Trail of Champ, that was directed, shot, written, and edited by my friend Alexander Pedikov. I had nothing to do with that other than producing it. And then we have a Kickstarter launching on February 7th, so a week from Thursday, we have a Kickstarter launching, and that will fund production it'll actually fund post-production of On the Trail of Bigfoot. So if you want to get your name in the credits of On the Trail of Bigfoot, you can back that Kickstarter, and you'll get your name in the credits of it. And you can help us fund Terror in the Skies, which comes out in very early June. And you can help fund production on Momo, the Missouri Monster, which will come out next, probably very early October.
What is Terror in the Skies? What is that one on?
Terror in the Skies is about winged cryptids in the state of Illinois. It starts with a Piasa legend, goes through the Alton Thunderbird attacks from the 1940s, up to the Lawndale incident that happened in 1977 when a little kid was actually picked up by a giant bird. And then it ends in Chicago with the Chicago Mothman flap that sort of erupted over the last couple of years and tracks the it kind of like ties all three of those separate incidents together: the 1940s Thunderbirds, the 1970s Thunderbirds, and the present day Mothman flap in Chicago.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Is you take the Mothman beyond Point Pleasant?
Yeah, and I mean, like, mostly what we're doing is showing that, like the fact that people are seeing the Chicago Phantom or Chicago Mothman, whatever you want to call it, the fact that people are seeing that isn't really that unusual if you look at the actual history of Illinois, the state of Illinois, and how long people have been seeing large winged cryptids in that state, going all the way back to the time of like Lewis and Clark and the westward expansion.
And then for those listeners that don't know who Momo is?
Momo is a really cool guy. He was super hairy, kind of looked like Cousin It from Addams Family. And he was a Bigfoot that was seen around a town called Louisiana, Missouri in the 1970s. Momo, the Missouri Monster, is going to be a pretty big departure for Small Town Monsters, and kind of like what we're calling it, like the next step in the evolution of what we're doing. It's going to blend our traditional sort of documentary style with more of a traditional horror film. So you're going to see what we always do, but also mixed alongside something that we've never done, which is probably like 60% of Momo the Missouri Monster is going to be a horror film from the 1970s.
That sounds fantastic.
I don't know how else to explain it. It's very difficult. When the first trailers start coming in, you'll understand. But it's think of like something like The Legend of Boggy Creek, only made in the present day, and you'll kind of have a better idea.
Legend of Boggy Creek's great movie, classic.
Yep.
I don't get, if people think the Boggy Creek Monster is the Legend of Boggy Creek, why aren't they watching it anyway?
I mean, it's definitely got an audience, and it was picked up for distribution, so it's probably it's in the top 4 STM movies. I think if people saw what the top, STM movies are, they'd be very surprised, because obviously, the Mothman's our biggest, the Mothman Point Pleasant's our biggest movie, but Beast of Whitehall's up there. Like, I don't know why, but Beast of Whitehall found a massive audience, probably over 1 million people. It's crazy which STM projects find a larger audience.
It's interesting once you have it completed, and then, the feedback, kind of like with the whole, this project, and it flipping my belief on Bigfoot.
to the negative, yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say negative. It is what it is.
Yeah. No, I just mean, like, I don't. As long as we're making people think about the subject in a way they haven't done before, I think that's a win for us. Like, I hate to say this because there's a series that just came out that is doing exactly this, but people are filmmakers especially are enamored with making series and movies that focus entirely on people running through the woods trying to find something. Mm-hmm. And that sort of thing has never interested me, but it is 99.9% of what is out there right now. So when I came to this project, which on the surface might almost be described as that, like it's people running through the woods, I wanted to do something else. Like I wanted to play around with that type of storytelling, but not do that same thing. So, like if I can do something like this that actually makes people think about the subject in a way they haven't before, and maybe either consider it, in a new light, or or at least give it a chance or whatever. It's that's a win, I think.
You actually reminded me of something else I wanted to ask, and that was one of the episodes. Someone mentions that a lot of the sightings occur during the day, and they are typically a Bigfoot is seen crossing a road when someone's on their way to work.
Yeah.
But then a lot of the researchers go out at night.
Yeah.
And I so as I was watching, through the episodes, I'm thinking about that, and I'm like, if most of the reports are, from these witnesses are during the daylight hours, why are they going out at night and not during the day? Or do they have shifts and these guys are just... I mean, I'm not talking specifically about Area X. I'm just talking.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because X, they're in at night. Like once
seems like it's 24/7.
Yeah, once night hits, they're not out in the woods. They're in base camp. I mean, you'd almost have to have a death wish to be out in the woods after too far out in the woods anyway. But like a big part, and I'm not trying to. I would hate this to come across like I'm ragging on researchers or investigators. I think groups like the Olympic Project and the NAWAC, from what I know of them, I don't think they are out at night. I don't think they're, at least not solely. I don't think they're running out. But I do think a lot of the weekend warrior Bigfooters do that because it's scary. And it's an adventure, and it's it's like because a lot of those guys are motivated by having an experience, and if that is heightened somewhat by the fact that it's dark, then that's great. That's why they're out there, is to have some sort of scary experience. And if you're out there during the day looking for Bigfoot, it might not be as scary.
No, but it might be more successful.
I agree, but I really do think they're more motivated by getting spooked in the woods. And I'm not ragging on them. This comes from my experience, and I'm the same way. When I was in X, I thought it was very interesting that our time spent out in the woods was actually always during the day, and the same with the Olympic Project, from what I know of them. They're more interested in trying to find evidence and rather than solely have some sort of interaction with what's in the woods.
Well, yeah, and that's, another thing is, when you're out there at night, you're missing the opportunity to find footprints or broken limbs or, hair stuck in a branch.
Can you hear the bell right now?
I can, yeah.
It's actually super creepy when you're in here alone at night. I've had this happen a couple times at night, and a couple of weeks ago it played some old love song, and I can't remember what it was. It was like Angel Eyes or something, and it was super creepy. It was like the setting for a horror movie.
Whatever it's playing right now is pretty creepy too, and I think it's very appropriate. It's perfect.
Yeah, it goes on for 3 minutes. It doesn't end. I don't know why this... Yeah.
Nope, it's still going. Well, that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, Seth, you have really gotten into, it appears, a lot of different cryptids.
Mm-hmm.
And you've been making documentaries and videos about them. What got you into choosing to do this with all these cryptids?
It started out as just I wanted to tell the Minerva Monster story, and that bloomed into telling the Beast of Whitehall story, and then Boggy Creek, and then I love the Mothman story, and so we were like, okay, well, let's take a break from telling Bigfoot stories and get into Mothman, because that's a story we loved, and then it just kind of continued spiraling there. But I've been fascinated with the strange and unusual for, a while, and it was never solely about Bigfoot. It was kind of about all of it. And in fact, when I was first getting into like the paranormal, it was more about UFOs than Bigfoot. So it's just a fascination for me, and trying to make, I guess, honestly, a lot of the other subjects other than Bigfoot, it isn't so much about like trying to get to the bottom of what's happening as it is, I just love the stories. Like when it comes to Bigfoot, there is something about it that I want to know. Like I want to know what's actually going on. But with the other stories, it's more of, I've always just loved the stories, and I love talking to the witnesses. So it's more about the people than it is the monsters for me. Like the monsters are great. And the descriptions are creepy or whatever, but I've always been more fascinated by talking to the witnesses.
So you didn't have any experiences in your youth, because a lot of people who do start to get into this type of research and that they know. I need
to come up with like a fake story though, because people ask me that. I feel like I'm letting them down because I've got nothing.
No, I think that makes it more fascinating because you don't have one, and this has become your passion. Whereas, most people are going to have one of those stories, and they're like, "Oh, well, that's why," But for somebody not to have one and to still have this passion, that makes it more interesting.
Yeah, no, it's not motivated by any personal experience. It's just, like I just find the entire subject and the impact it has on witnesses really, really fascinating.
Well, wasn't the Minerva monster a local story for you?
Yeah, Minerva is only 15, 20 minutes from Bolivar, which is where I grew up. I grew up in Bolivar. And a large, portion of, well, not a large portion, a big part of why we are able to do this today is because of making the Minerva monster and the audience it found locally here in Northeast Ohio. Because of that, we were able to make the Beast of Whitehall, and that kind of helped us grow. So, that case was one I'd been super fascinated with, and that's why it plays so heavily into episode 3 of On the Trail of.
Well, I mean, and you can't not include that if you're doing a documentary about Bigfoot.
Yeah, it's very overlooked, but it is a very important case to the history of the subject. That's why episode 3 opens and ends with Barbara and I having that discussion about the Minerva monster case sort of being the case that drew the attention of the country to Bigfoot in the Northeast. That's where it kind of grew out of the Pacific Northwest and out of places like Fouke, Arkansas, and it became a nationwide phenomena.
Exactly.
When you do all your videography and so forth, what percentage would you say you actually record that you don't end up ever using? Because it seems like there would be a lot.
Oh, yeah. It's huge. Now, on the films, it's probably considerably less. When we first started out, I know with like Minerva Monster and Beast of Whitehall and Boggy Creek Monster, there's probably enough B-roll lying around you could make an entire second or third movie even, especially like Boggy Creek Monster. There's hours of cut B-roll, just sitting around that never got used. But we've gotten much more, selective about what we're shooting and how we're shooting it too. And I know on Bray Road Beast, to my knowledge, there was actually no leftover B-roll when we made Bray Road Beast, and it might have been the same story with Flatwoods Monster.
Wow.
So we've gotten much more selective about how much we're shooting, what we're shooting, and we'll pretty much anymore use everything. I know Terror in the Skies will use all the footage that we shot. So, and some of that is just we've been doing this now we started filming Minerva Monster in the summer of 2014. So technically this is our 5th year of doing this. So, at this point we're learning, as we go, obviously. And some of that is has led to us not being as willy-nilly with just pressing record on anything, you know. But there's a ton of footage, B-roll, but there's also a ton of, you know, interview footage too, and that's why I did Case Files. Case Files was a free miniseries you can watch on YouTube or Amazon Prime, and they are spin-offs from the regular movies, but, you know, basically like a short film that you could tack on to the end of one of the original movies and have an extra story, you know, that's part of it. And naturally, 2 of those episodes are focused on the Boggy Creek Monster because that's the one we have the most footage from. But there's also at least 1 or 2 Mothman episodes. There's an Invasion on Chestnut Ridge. There's a Beast of Whitehall episode as well. I shot an entire episode that I haven't even had time to edit yet that's about the Kecksburg UFO that would spin out of Invasion on Chestnut Ridge. So there's a lot of content that we never, you know, can find a home for within the films.
And what about missed opportunities? Do you find that when you're putting things together in the end, you're like, oh, I needed this, and you kind of go back? I mean, besides putting yourself into your newest feature, but
it seems like that's getting worse. It's strange because, like, when we started out, you know, we made Minerva Monster. We were the first people to ever interview anyone from the Caton family for a movie, and it, you know, like, I felt like we did all we could on that. And the same thing happened with Beast of Whitehall, and the same thing happened with Boggy Creek Monster. And I think our Mothman movie condenses a very complicated story into about an hour and 6 minutes in a really concise way. And we got a lot of interviews in there. And then we got to, and even Flatwoods Monster, you know, we got the original, you know, the 2 living witnesses, but somewhere after the making of Flatwoods Monster, all of a sudden I started getting contacted by people that had some sort of role to play in that original story that would have been great in our film, but I didn't know they existed. We had a lady come to a screening here in Wadsworth, Ohio, who happens to own a ranch outside of Wadsworth, who grew up in Flatwoods and was driving to church the night that the object flew across the sky, and she saw it. And then I found out that the sheriff's office phone operator in Flatwoods that took the call from Mrs. May after they saw the Flatwoods Monster still alive, and she wanted to talk, and things like that started happening. And then we got to the Bray Road Beast, and that was probably one of the most frustrating experiences I've had making a movie, where we lost 3 of our witnesses during the making of the movie. They just dropped out of doing it, and we ended up not having any of the original witnesses, you know, present in that film. And that drives me crazy, because that's how we've kind of gotten where we are, is by contacting original witnesses and managing to convince them to tell us their story. So that for me is the most frustrating aspect of doing this, is if we don't have those people, you know, involved in what we're doing.
Yeah, but
that would bug me too. It really would.
It's like, yeah, they see the movie and they're like, "Hey, I could have been in that."
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it is.
You wouldn't know about it otherwise. I mean, how would you know?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, it's just it is like, we got contacted. I remember after Boggy Creek Monster, we got contacted by someone who was actually a relative of Bobby Ford, who, you know, supposedly was in the movie. Bobby Ford was on the toilet and the hand came through the window in The Legend of Boggy Creek. Like, that story is real. And we talked to someone that was related to him, and I was like, crap, like, that would have been a great person to interview for the movie.
Remind everybody again the release date for On the Trail of Bigfoot, and how they can go about getting a copy of it or watch it digitally.
Yeah, it's March 29th is the official release date. If you want to see it a week early, possibly even earlier than that, you can back the Kickstarter, which launches February 7th and runs through March 9th. And that will actually help us fund all of the stuff we're working on in 2019. On the Trail of Bigfoot will be available on Amazon, Vimeo on demand, Vidispace, and DVD. And you can get DVDs through shop.smalltownmonsters.com.
Perfect. Seth, I can't thank you enough for taking the time out to talk with us and give us all these wonderful stories of your adventures in filming the making of Bigfoot, or In Search of Bigfoot.
On the trail of
On the
Bigfoot.
trail of
On the
Bigfoot.
It's okay. You were super close.
Yeah, I tell you.
Multiple times. Too.
I can't
Thanks.
thank you enough for
So
Yes.
let's do that thank you one more
being so
time.
graceful when I when I got the title wrong of your movie.
No, you're fine. Someone the other day put up a notification that I was going to be at their event and called it On the Road of Bigfoot, which at least in Search of Bigfoot makes sense. On the Road of Bigfoot makes no sense whatsoever.
I went Leonard Nimoy for some reason. I don't know. You remind me of Eli Roth or Zachary Quinto. I don't know if anybody's ever said that to you.
Like a fat version.
Shut your mouth, you're not. No, and so I think that's just I got it in my head that In Search of. Yeah.
Okay,
Anyway,
I'll take that as a compliment.
you should very much so. I mean, Leonard Nimoy. Come on, and Zachary Quinto. Hello.
Eli Roth's pretty cool though. I like Eli Roth.
Yes. All of them are good. And
Yeah.
Eli Roth is an excellent filmmaker, although he does fiction. Awesome. One of my favorites.
Yeah.
And you, as far as documentaries, Small Town Monsters, one of my favorites. So
Thank you.
Been an honor, sir.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on, and thank you all for listening. We will be live again next month, and until the next episode, stay scared.